Hello, I'm Gina LeClair. I grew up in a old brick farmhouse in the town of Keene, which is in the Adirondack Mountains. I had a father who loved the outdoors, and he instilled that in me in many ways. He shared much of his free time with me when he was home. There would be times, this was in the 60s when this was all happening. I was an elementary school child in the 60s, and I'm going to tell you about my free-range childhood in the Adirondack Mountains. That my father, he'd wake us up, and other kids and other families had never heard of doing such things. My father would wake us up sometimes, and he'd say, come on, the aurora borealis is out. And we'd go and we'd sit in my sister's bedroom, which had a deep windowsill, and we'd watch. And you could see it move. It wasn't like you're going to see in Alaska or in the high north states, but it was something I'll always remember. It's just seeing that and then really recognizing that out the windowsill. On other nights, he might come inside and, come on, you got to come outside. The fireflies are out. And we had a big meadow on one side of the house. I grew up on 500 acres, so there was a lot of different places to explore. But there was this big meadow right outside of the house. And when the weather was right, there was a period of time, maybe a couple of weeks in the summer, that the fireflies would be en masse. I haven't seen them like that since I was a child. The meadow was maybe that high, and I was a child, so that probably was that high. But the fireflies would be maybe this high above the meadow. It was a large meadow. I'd like to say thousands. I know it was hundreds and hundreds at least. And it would just be like looking up at the Milky Way or something where all the lights are there and they're sparkling. I remember how fascinating they were. Sometimes in the wintertime, he'd say, come on, get your boots on. And my sister and I would go with him. And we were in a very narrow valley, so there was a lot of hills to climb. And the snow was deep back then in the 60s. Remember that? You'd get 2 or 3 feet. So if you wanted to walk in the snow, you were really in the snow. That we'd walk up one of the hills, and in the full moonlight, trees make dark shadows, but the snow is bright white. And I was always a little bit of a calf. I always knew my father would never do anything that would cause us harm, and if something happened, he'd protect us. But I was always waiting for wolves or something, and we didn't even have wolves up there, but I was always a little timid about it. But it was always a real thrill to be up there and be scared, but still be out there in the snow. Sometimes he'd call us, and we'd sit out and listen to owls. Sometimes he did a lot of things. He did a lot of things with me. One of the things he did for me that I really never realized how special that was is he gave me a puppy. She was my constant companion for all of the time that I explored the woods when I was a child. And I never realized the significance that had. I would have never wandered alone without her. She was quiet. She followed along. She laid down. I'd go to the places that I loved. There was a lot of things to see, but they were all things that a child might see that an adult might never notice. We had a pond. My bedroom looked down over the pond. I was a second-story bedroom. And I remember one time looking out, and you could see these big black things in the pond. The pond was deep on both sides, and then in the center it was kind of shallow. And I could see these big dark things, and I couldn't figure what they were. My father had a pair of old black fireman's boots. You know how those boots look, and they got the pull-up straps, and they're kind of high. And they were high enough, though, if I stayed in the center of the pond, the water would never go over the top of the boots. So I got my boots, and my dog followed me along, and I had my pail or whatever it was I always looked at stuff in, and I get up there, and it was something I had never seen then before, and I've never seen since. It was huge, not swarms, like huge groups of baby black tadpoles. I think they were toads. I never knew what they were. And you could stand there and they'd be all around you. I used those boots to look for toads and frogs, and it was wonderful. I loved it. The one thing you had to be careful for is you got those boots on over your shoes, and they're pretty big because they're a men's boot that went over their shoes for firefighting, and I had a size 7 shoe. So I'd get those boots on, and I'd get out there, and then you'd hit the mucky spots. And the first time it happened, I thought, oh, what am I going to do? Then I realized you could grab the handles on the boots, and you could move your leg forward, and then you could move forward again, and keep doing that as you walked through the pond. And I never sunk higher than the top of the boots. That was probably my favorite memory, and the part that kept me most occupied was to go to that pond. But there were so many things that a child can explore in the woods, and they don't do that anymore. You don't hear people saying, go outside. Well, oh, here's your sandwich, here's your lunch. So there was a trickle of a stream. I loved wildflowers. And there was a trickle of a stream that was only there in the spring for a short while. And my dog and I would walk up, probably daily, I don't remember, and we'd watch because it was lined with yellow and white violets, and they'd all come into bloom at once, and it was beautiful. There was a hillside in another spot. Do you know hepatica, mayflower? They're pink and purple and whites, and the bank was very steep, and we'd keep checking and checking, and one day you'd go there, and then the hill was covered with hepatica. I was a wanderer. There was a grass knoll that Star and I would climb up to, and it was in the forest. You couldn't see it from down below. When you got to the top, are you familiar with what the grass is like in the forest? It's very fine and very soft. And there was a knoll, not very big, and you could sit on that knoll. And the All Sable River was across the river from the house. And Star and I could sit there, and you'd sit on this soft green grass, and you could look to the left and the right, up and down the valley, and you could see the river, and I could see my home. And there were no houses for, I don't know, maybe a half a mile on either side. So we were really kind of separate from everything. That there was a place where if you wanted to push through the brush, you'd get to a cliff that was hidden. And at the base of that, I was always edgy about that, but I did it. And you'd get there, and it would smell very moist because all the water running down off, and the ferns, for me being this high, were about chest height. But the smell of the ferns against the moist cliff, you'll always remember that smell. If you're ever in the forest where it's wet and the ferns are there, you know. That there were so many things and so many places to explore. I hope everyone has a childhood or has a chance to do that, or did have to do that with a child. The one restriction I had on all the wandering I did was don't go to the sandbank, because he was always afraid I'd get too close and it would cave in. We used to go down to the All Sable River where the fly fishermen come. And we'd sit, there was a huge rock that dropped down into the river, and you could sit there, I could sit there for hours, and the fly fishermen would come, and you know how the lines go out, and they'd fish, and you could sometimes see a big trout right there underneath the rock, and I'd think, I'm not telling them there's a fish here. There was a lot of different stories like that I could tell you. I think my point in a lot of this is, I want you to think about how simple the things are and how they've stayed with me. And we tend sometimes to think, when we interact with a child, we have to climb the mountain. We have to take them on a big hike. We have to do the big things. But the small things are what stay with them. That it's those things that they'll carry, and they'll feel that peace in the forest. It's not a goal, it's an experience. And if you do simple things with a child, it'll stay with them forever, and that love will stay with them forever. I had 2 sons. I worried. I mean, we're talking in the late 70s and early 80s. And I thought, my kids can't do this. I don't live where I have access to forest and things like that for them to do that. But I took them to the forest. I went to waterways, and I went into marsh areas with them every chance I get. We did it every week. And you always wonder, what difference did it make? Did it help? And I have 2 things that I know it helped. And I have a son that's a dispatch officer for 911. Tough job. You hear a lot of things. You hear things that nobody wants to know happens, and they spend a lot of time on the phone with people until the police officers or the EMS get there. So they're really dealing with what's going on, and it's often very bad. So he said to me one time, there's a forest down near Saratoga. It's called Daketown Forest. Daketown Forest is all huge pine trees. Go down there and walk sometime in the pines when the wind's blowing. It's wonderful, the sound. But he said to me, I go to Daketown Forest on my way home sometimes because it helps me be okay to go home. So I thought, he gets it. He gets the forest. And now when I watch my grandchildren and my sons, I know it worked. They're doing the same things with their children, and they're doing them even more so. They're doing more hunting, more fishing. They're spending more time in the woods. They're doing it all. So I want to say to you, if you have a child that lives next door to you that doesn't get to a park, take them down to Cole's Woods. Walk in the woods. Point out the mushroom. Point out the big pine cone or the big tree. And kids will remember the little things forever. And think about our future, on our environment, our national parks, our wild places. Our children are the future of the preservation of those places. So if we don't instill something in them, what hope do we have? Thank you.